Hi, everyone. This is Brianna Pruitt from San Diego City College. Today we are going to be looking at some Poly 101 material on ancient ideal societies. Earlier this week, we learned about Confucianism and Taoism from ancient China, and today we will look at the Manusmriti, or Laws of Manu, from ancient India, as well as the Republic by Plato from ancient Greece. As I've said in class before, the reason we go back to these texts is because of all of the different applications that you can get from these ancient texts to modern societies. So if we want to understand the way the world works today, we need to first see the places that we came from. So let's start with the basics on the Manusmriti, or Laws of Manu. This text is a religious text from Hinduism. It came from India and was originally thought to be written around 1250 to 1200 BCE, and was later reclassified to be from the era of 200 BCE to 200 CE. The author is technically unknown because it was passed through oral tradition, like many of our ancient texts, and there were likely many different contributors. This whole text includes a lot of what you would expect in a religious story. It has a creation story, it has the idea of the purpose of life or the nature of reality, which is called dharma in Sanskrit. Here in this text, they also outline 4 different social classes called varnas, and there's a focus on karma, reincarnation, and enlightenment. The idea is that you're born into a certain place based on your past lives or karma, and if you prescribe to the laws or rules given in this text and or Hinduism in general, that then you will be reincarnated into a higher level in your next life, and at the end of all of your reincarnations, you will hopefully be at one with the gods. The reason I'm sharing this text is because Sir William Jones was someone who discovered this text during the colonial India time period, and after translating the text, used it to create the laws and rules of colonial India, which has caused or created a modern caste system that, while has been reformed, still exists in India today, causing divides. So in the Manusmriti, there are 4 social classes, or varnas, which is part of what we are focusing on today. The first class is the Brahmins, which are made up of priests, scholars, and teachers. The second class is the Kshatriyas, who are rulers, warriors, and administrators. I apologize if I butchered that name. I'm still practicing my ancient Sanskrit. The third class is known as the Vaisyas, who are merchants and agriculturalists. And finally, you have the last class, which is the Shudras, and these are laborers and servants. Now, if you think about the divisions in these classes, there are certain things that not only relate to the different rules of Hinduism, but it also talks about the many different levels of learning and growth and intelligence, which is part of how the system works. You start from the bottom here with the Sudras, and if you learn to serve well, you in your next life can move up to become someone who works in trade or farming of food. And from there, if you serve well, you can move up to the class of rulers, warriors, and administrators. And as you learn to follow rules there, as you learn to be virtuous, as you learn to do all of this well, then you can move up to the class of the priests, scholars, and teachers. After this class is what I was talking about, where you head towards enlightenment and the final afterlife. Now, in the Laws of Manu, there is actually a metaphor used about the body of Manu and how each of the different classes related to a body part, which can help you understand their different levels. So the Brahmins were the head, the thinkers, the leaders, those in charge. The Kriyaas were the arms, right? They're the ones who do, they're the ones who take that action. They are the ones administering all of the roles that come from the head. The Vaisyas come from the merchants and agriculturalists, right? These are people who are working with their legs, they're moving all day, they're here to support the arms and the head. And finally, you get the Sudras, who are the laborers and servants. These are the feet upon which the foundation is built. One thing to note about this that's really interesting is you can only be in these top 3 classes if you are second born. All human existence starts as a firstborn in the Sudras class. And the idea is that the older your soul is, the older your self is, the more reincarnations you have had to build up into these class systems. Now, I understand that these are a lot of belief-based ideas, but please understand that a lot of political theory comes into play the question of what is right and what is wrong, what is human nature, what is just, what is unjust. These questions are often really closely connected to religion, which is why you didn't see a distinct separation between church and state until the modern era. So, some things that you need to know about the Manusmriti is that regardless of which class you're born into, you stay in that class, you serve in that life, you are meant to be learning the lessons of that role in this life. And if you follow those laws, you reincarnate at a higher level. There are a lot of rules about how you conduct yourself in this system. So you can learn about how to be virtuous. You learn how to serve those above you. You learn how to treat your teachers, your priests, your administrators. There are laws about marriage. There are laws about not only marriage, but also there's many, like, these aren't the only 4 classes, but there are many different classes that come from these main 4 classes, especially if you marry outside of your class. It's a really complex system. But the idea is about how you keep your body clean, about how you treat your body with what you eat. Then it's about how you treat other people, how you serve. And if you don't learn the lessons meant for you in these different roles, then you don't reincarnate and you come back into the same class again to experience those lessons that you haven't yet learned. Another factor in the Manusmriti that's really important are the ashramas, which are the 4 stages of life. And this actually helps you see some of the family focus that comes with the Hindu system, even if it's perpetuating a caste system that creates a lot of conflict over how we handle diversity. So the first stage of life is that of a student, the Brahmachara, and that is focused on learning, studying, and preparing for life. This is ages 0 to 25. You are a child, you grow up in your parents' home, you are often sent off to a teacher or a sage to learn about your role. And in this time period, your only focus and goal is to learn and grow so that you are prepared for the next stage of life. The second stage of life is that of a householder. This is usually what we would consider adulthood, ages 25 to 50. It begins with marriage, and this is where you start your own family. You have now trained for a job where you can provide for not only your children and your wife. No, women didn't work then. And then also you are caring for some of the elders. This is one of those systems where you see multiple generations in a household, and while you are the one who is of able body and mind, you are serving everyone else in your household by being a producer for your benefits. The third stage is what you could kind of consider a grandparent or an advisor stage. This begins around 50 to 75. This is once you have had your own children and you are now starting to see your grandchildren. You begin to rid yourself of material possessions, and your focus is on advising and guiding your offspring, being there as a source of support for the householder that you have raised. And you begin reflecting on the afterlife, on your dharma, and what comes next in this world. The final stage is one of hermit or recluse. This is usually around 75 through death, and this is where you focus on prayer and meditation. At this point, you have cast off all material possessions. You have renounced all worldly goods. You often go off into a hut in the woods, maybe you wander, you move from place to place in a constant and permanent state of meditation that prepares you for your afterlife. There is so much more that we can talk about when it comes to the Manusmriti. There's so much more that goes into this system, but today's goal is to compare this with another text. So we are now going to move on to talk about Plato's Republic. So if you need to take a break, now is a great time to pause, stretch, stand up, get a drink of water, use a restroom, and then come back. Pause. Okay, as you're coming back from your pause, welcome back. These are the basics on the Republic by Plato. This is a philosophical text that came from ancient Greece around 375 BCE. The author is technically Plato as the writer, but he's writing down dialogues or conversations held by his teacher Socrates. This is a really amazing text, and if we had time, I would love to assign you to read all of it, but you may want to save that until you take an entire semester or quarter on political theory. The whole text includes arguments on what is justice, right? And it talks about the different parts of the soul that all people have. So you see there is some spirituality here, but from those parts of the soul, there are also 3 different social classes defined, and part of this conversation is related to justice, which we will get into in a minute. You also see state-controlled education. The text then goes on to talk about other stuff we will get into next week about types of regimes, arguments for philosopher kings, etc. This text also teaches one of my favorite topics about how one form of government eventually devolves into another, and it creates a cycle that we can actually see throughout all of history, even though it was just a theory at that time. The reason I'm including this text is that it had a major impact by being the foundation of all Western philosophy, and it is widely used in Western republics, democracies, etc. Moving on, let's talk about the 3 different social classes created in the Republic. The first is the guardians, or the teachers, rulers, and philosophers. The second is the auxiliaries, who are protectors, military, and warriors. And the third group is the producers. And this is basically everyone else. You can be a craftsman, a merchant, an artist, an agriculturalist. You can be an entertainer, like a minstrel. You can be in service. So you can be someone who works at a dining hall serving the food. You can be service in terms of a laborer in the fields. You can be someone who creates art. You can be a blacksmith. You can be someone who runs the caravans of trade from here to other parts of the world. The producers are the majority of society, and it's the guardians and the auxiliaries that are going to be smaller groups and more specifically trained. Now, in the Republic, the metaphor uses actually of different types of metal, of gold, silver, and bronze, and it has to do with kind of a metaphor on the value of these metals, even though people are all treated equally. The goal here in the different social classes, and one thing that's really different about this text is while this system is technically in 3 different groups, all people are seen as equal. You are not better than or worse than, you are not superior or inferior in terms of the other classes. You just have different skill sets, and those skill sets are based in naturally who you are. Now, the definition of justice that Socrates eventually gives is that justice is doing what you are best at and not getting into anyone else's business. How crazy is it that Plato, one of the founders of all Western philosophy, said that the true meaning of justice is being who you are and doing what you are meant to do. And that's what makes this system work, right? Is that if we let people develop naturally, and as they go to school, as they try out different skill sets, right? Guardians are going to be people who are more leaning towards philosophical texts. These are people who want to read and write. These are people who want to think about the good of the whole. These are probably people who might be taking political science classes, right? The auxiliaries are going to be people who have strong tendencies towards protection, but also have physical benefits. These are people who are going to be the strongest, the fastest. A lot of these people in today's society would be called kinesthetic learners. They're people who might have ended up as athletes professionally. Finally, the producers are going to end up in trades that are related to those talents. So if you're a sculptor or a painter, be an artist of the producing class. If you are someone who has a mind for business and trade, then be a merchant and run those caravans. If you are someone that has a green thumb and you are great at growing food, working through different weather patterns, then be an agriculturalist. The idea is that whatever it is that you're good at, plus whatever satisfies not only your natural skills, but your personal interests, that is where you go into a different class. The thing that's really interesting about this system is they argue that it would only work through education handled by the state. And there are some, this isn't guaranteed, but there are some arguments made that this would require ignorance of your biological parents, so that therefore you don't know from which class you were born. You can marry across any class. You can have a guardian married to an auxiliary. You can have an auxiliary married to a producer. You can have a producer married to a guardian. Those sorts of class divides didn't really matter. But if you have two guardians who end up married and producing children, the child could absolutely end up being of the producing class. If you have two parents who are auxiliaries, your child could end up being an auxiliary. They could also end up being a guardian, right? Because it's about who individuals are that makes this system work. And the reason that this system works, according to Plato, is that if everyone is doing what they're good at, that feels good, right? And then you're also doing something that you're naturally inclined towards, which means that you're happy. So if you're doing what makes you happy, you're going to do it better. Think about rulers. If rulers make good laws, it's because they genuinely care about learning. The likeliness that you will end up with a ruler who cares most about the people is someone who has probably spent a lot of time thinking about what is best for the people, and hopefully someone who also gets to know their people. If you are an auxiliary, then that means that you are someone who is going to protect well, not because you've been drafted and forced into this position, but you crave the honor. You crave that nationality. You crave the sense of putting yourself between those you love and others at risk. And therefore you would work well in this position. Finally, the producers are going to be happy because they're doing what they love and what they are good at. And so they're going to follow the rules given to them. That's the theory behind this system. Now, there's also other parts of this system that I won't get deeply into, but it has to do with our appetites of life. Another thing that I haven't put on these slides, but I think is really interesting, is that the guardians and auxiliaries actually are supposed to live in some sort of state-sponsored housing with minimal luxury goods. They're meant to live in a way that, because they have these duties, they're not meant to serve the appetites of the soul. They're meant to eat food that sustains their bodies. They're not meant to be interested in large feasts of fancy wine and the best foods, right? But those types of interests, those appetites and desires, can be best suited towards the producers, because why deny yourself something that makes you happy if you are there to only live for yourself? So this is a little bit interesting, and it's a totally different topic that we can talk about at another time. But there's this idea that as you serve, each different class also has its own benefits. So at the producers, maybe if you're like, man, it would be cool to be in charge, but it also helps to see that those in charge have to give up fancy dance parties and luxurious fabrics and robes, and they don't get to have the finest wine, right? The guardians and the auxiliaries instead are focused on that role of service towards others, which means less focus on serving their own desires. So to review some of these different societies, I think that they have both a lot of benefits and a lot of consequences for each system, but we can talk about that a little bit more on our discussion board this week, as well as in our class. So to review, let's just compare and contrast what's similar about these societies. They're all ancient texts. They are all foundations in their respective cultures, and they all impact modern world ideas, although it's in their own ways. For the Manusmriti, remember that this text is from India. It is a religious text, and it focuses on a way to live a spiritual purpose with a focus on our afterlife. There are 4 different classes. You stay in the class that you're born into, and the focus is on your personal learning and growth to go back to the spiritual focus on afterlife. Remember, the whole reason we included this text, though, is that a British colonial explorer and translator found this text and thought that it was real law, not religious law, and so he used it to help develop colonial India's rules so that the system was actually put into place legally. Now, whether or not you believe in this system from a religious perspective is one thing, and there were many people who were Hindu in colonial India. However, what you're going to see is that, and we talked about intent versus impact this week, right? The intent was to try to govern the people in a way that they understood because it was already part of their life. Unfortunately, the impact was to create severe socioeconomic divides between different groups of people, regardless of if they followed this religion or not. Some of those divides have been worked on, and we can talk about them more in class, especially in the modern day, but lingering consequences from this choice still exist today. Now, the Republic from Plato is from ancient Greece. It's a philosophical text, not based in religion, although there is connection to spirituality and the idea of self and highest self. It focuses on a way to live for the purposes of society with a focus on state and creating the best state possible. They develop 3 different classes, and all classes are equal but determined by your natural skill, and the focus is on what is best for the whole. Ironically, what they say is best for the whole ends up being what is best for each individual, and that's the argument for it working. One thing I haven't mentioned yet that's interesting, though, is that the Republic is one of the first recorded versions of a utopian society. While this is a fabulous idea, and we can talk later about the rulership of philosopher kings that would make this possible, unfortunately, we have never seen a society like this in the world today, and there would be a lot of problems in trying to make it happen. So while it's a great idea, I don't know if we can necessarily call it realistic. It's just something to think about as we consider what the different ideal societies are today and what they have been in the past. All right, my friends, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate your attention and focus. Have a wonderful weekend, and let me know what you think. Thanks so much. Bye.